welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the life of a man who literally rewired the modern world, Henry Ford. We're going to look at the nuts and bolts of his genius, how he completely revolutionized manufacturing and, how he put America on wheels. But we're also going to confront the incredibly complex social contradictions of his life. He was a guy of high ideals, hard practicalities, and absolutely stark paradoxes. Okay, let's look at our roadmap. We'll trace his journey from the farm to the Model T, break down that massive assembly line breakthrough, dig into wages and worker control, navigate his incredibly complex public persona, and finally, look at his efforts to preserve American history. Section 1, From Farm to Model T, The Boy Who Tinkered with Time. The man who kickstarted the industrial age actually began as a farm boy in Dearborn, Michigan back in 1863. But here's the thing, he absolutely hated farm chores, despised them. His mind was purely mechanical. At just 13, he completely dismantled and reassembled a pocket watch from his dad, and pretty soon he was the go-to neighborhood watch repairman. That little spark set off a wild chain reaction. He ditches the farm for Detroit at 16 to apprentice as a mechanic, builds the gas-powered quadricycle in 1896, founds Ford Motor Company in 1903, and then boom, introduces the world-changing Model T in 1908. And get this, Ford was so intensely obsessed with building that first car that he was working on it every single night in a tiny shed behind his house. His neighbors literally called him Crazy Henry. Well, at 2 a.m. on June 4th, 1896, he finally finishes the prototype, only to realize the shed door is way too small to get the car out. So what does he do? He literally grabs an axe, smashes a giant hole right through the brick wall of his shed, and drives his first car out into the Detroit night. Just incredible determination. And that exact determination fueled his famous declaration, "I will build a motor car for the great multitude." You have to remember, before the 1908 Model T, cars were these incredibly expensive, handcrafted toys for the ultra-rich. Ford completely flipped the script on that. He wanted a car that was standardized, like a pin from a factory, simple to drive, and really cheap to fix. By using this lightweight but super strong vanadium steel, he built a car so durable and affordable, it completely changed the automobile from an elite status symbol into a total everyday necessity. Which brings us to Section 2, The Assembly Line Breakthrough, Revolution at Highland Park. So by 1910, demand for the Model T is just exploding. Ford actually has to build a massive 62-acre factory in Highland Park just to try and keep up. But making cars one by one, with mechanics walking all around a stationary chassis, still way too slow. He had to completely rethink what manufacturing even meant. And surprisingly, the light bulb moment came from Chicago meatpackers. Seriously. Ford watched butchers using an overhead trolley system to strip a carcass as it moved past them, and he thought, wait a minute, what if we reverse that? What if we start with nothing and build the car as it moves past the workers? Talk about a paradigm shift. Instead of bringing the man to the work comes to the man. They tested this out in 1913, basically just slowly pulling a chassis across the floor with a rope while 140 guys attached parts as it went. Then they really dialed it in. They built man-high lines, basically waist-high workstations so workers didn't even have to move their feet. And then the final piece, endless power-driven conveyor belts seamlessly feeding parts right into the hands of stationary workers. To put the sheer impact of this into perspective, just look at the assembly time. By breaking the whole process down into really repetitive, simple tasks on a moving line, the time it took to build a single Model T chassis plummeted from over 12.5 hours down to a mind-boggling 93 minutes. It's almost inconceivable. And because production got so insanely efficient, the cost to build each car absolutely tanked. And Ford passed those savings right back to the consumer. The price of a Model T eventually dropped from $825 down to just $310 by 1926. He just kept slashing his own profit margins to push higher sales volume. And by doing that, he truly democratized the car. Get this, by 1918, half of all the cars on the road in the entire United States were Model Ts. Half. Moving on to Section 3, Wages and Worker Control, the catch to the $5 day. Now, we've talked about the mechanical brilliance, but we have to ask, what was the human cost of all this extreme efficiency? The guys on the line didn't need to be skilled craftsmen anymore. They were basically just day laborers performing one single mind-numbing task over and over and over for 9 hours straight. It was incredibly grueling, unfulfilling work. And because it was so tedious, the turnover rate was just out of control. Think about this. In 1913, Ford had to hire 963 workers just to keep 100 jobs filled, almost 1,000 hires for 100 spots. That constant revolving door of training new guys was creating a huge financial crisis. So Ford needed a radical fix to keep the whole operation from derailing. His fix was a number that shook the world: $5. In January 1914, Ford stuns the industrial landscape by rolling out a $5 minimum daily wage, while also cutting the workday from 9 hours down to 8. That basically doubled the average worker's pay overnight, and it was a brilliant business move. Turnover drops to almost zero, productivity goes through the roof, and here's the really cunning part. His workers suddenly have the money and the free time to actually buy the cars they're making. He turned his own workforce into a fiercely loyal customer base. But, there was a major catch to this new money. To actually get that $5 a day, workers had to meet Ford's incredibly strict personal moral standards. He actually set up a sociological department with a whole team of investigators who would literally show up unannounced at employees' homes. They'd check your bank records, judge how clean your house was, make sure you weren't renting out rooms, and poke around to see if you drank or gambled. And for thousands of immigrants, they strictly enforced mandatory attendance at the Ford English School. It was a massive intrusion into private life, basically extreme social compliance in exchange for a living wage. Let's transition to Section 4, a complex public persona, the light and the dark. Now, that sociological department is really just one glimpse into how Ford's entire life was defined by these intense contradictions. As he became this massive American folk hero, his personal beliefs became very public, revealing an extreme juxtaposition. On one hand, you have a man deeply dedicated to peace and unprecedented philanthropy. And on the other, someone who held and actively promoted deeply offensive prejudices. It's absolutely crucial to look at these polarizing facts objectively, right alongside each other. So Ford was a strict pacifist who literally funded a peace ship in 1915 to try and stop World War I. And his family established the Ford Foundation, which still gives out massive global grants today. But at the exact same time, he bought a newspaper, the Dearborn Independent, and used it to publish prominent anti-Semitic tracts and conspiracy theories. His influence in that space was so widely recognized internationally that in 1938, the Nazi regime actually awarded him the Grand Cross of the German Eagle. It's a stark, undeniable reminder of just how deep the paradoxes run in some of these major historical figures. Finally, Section 5, Preserving American History, the Edison Institute. Back in 1919, during a libel trial, Ford famously dropped the quote that history is bunk. Now, he later clarified that he only meant the history of kings and generals. He thought that was useless. He believed the real history of America lived in ordinary people and everyday tools, and he really set out to prove it. The guy who basically invented modern industry became completely obsessed with the past. He started hoarding clocks, old farming tools, steam engines, and tons of stuff from his personal hero, Thomas Edison. All of this eventually became the Edison Institute, which we know today as the massive Henry Ford Museum and Greenfield Village, opened in 1929. Ford's ultimate goal for this project was really specific. He said, "When we are through, we shall have reproduced American life as lived." And that, I think, is the best way of preserving at least a part of our history and tradition. It shows us really deep, almost wistful reverence for the quiet, pre-industrial farm life he ran away from as a kid. Which really brings us to our final thought for today's explainer. Is it ironic that the man who arguably did the most to accelerate America into the modern future spent his final days trying to perfectly preserve the very past he helped erase? Henry Ford completely rewired our landscape, our economy, and how we work today, all through the sheer force of efficiency. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack the mechanics and the deep contradictions of the ultimate innovator's paradox. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.